So, obviously, this is Eric Doctor because you bought tickets to this, but what you probably don't know about Eric Doctor is that he's probably one of the most prolific type people that I've ever met in terms of his interest in it since the day I met him. Um, when I was kind of struggling in ad school, he was the one who like volunteered to like help me like with type and the fundamentals of it in terms of like usage and history and everything. So I've always leaned on him, and I even made a film that was partially based on him I was living in New York called "Give Him Helvetica" about a type blind graphic designer, which is as absurd as it sounds, but I didn't know when I asked him to do it that Eric had actually been an actor, so he did amazing. But yeah, I'm super stoked for this panel because, as we were talking about earlier, politics is all consuming right now with the election a week away. So it's just very timely to learn how campaign advertising kind of has a subliminal effect based on the type choices they make. So I'm really excited for Eric, and I really appreciate him taking the time to do this for us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Josh. My dog Vector heard something outside, so hopefully he'll be quiet through this. But anyway, let me go ahead and share my screen. You're going to see my horrific desktop. And okay, we're good to go? Where'd my Zoom stuff go? Because I want to get the chat and the Q&A. Is there a way to get the chat open? Just in case. Okay, so what we're going to do, this presentation is in two parts. The first part is about recent presidential campaigns. It actually originated as a lesson that I give in my type classes at Miami Ad School and Parsons about the use of type for identity. We're going to break for questions. And then I'm going to present two campaign identities that I've worked on myself. So if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. Like I said, we'll break for questions in the middle and we'll do questions again at the end. But sometimes it's useful to, get a dialogue going in the middle of the presentation as well. So I'll keep an eye on that. Okay, so if y'all have seen the documentary Knock Down the House, which was on Netflix, this documentary followed four insurgent congressional campaigns in 2018. Cori Bush, Paula Jean Swearengin, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I forget the fourth. But there's this scene where AOC is comparing her campaign literature to her opponent Joe Crowley's campaign literature, and she refers to his campaign literature as a Victoria's Secret catalog. It's very shiny, very glossy, not substantial at all, compared to hers, which has a clear call to action: vote on Tuesday, June 26th. And she says this is the difference between a consultant and an organizer. And this was my favorite scene in the movie because it's a scene that deals directly with design. Now, this scene deals with the functionality of design, but what we're going to talk about today is not the functionality of design, but the stories that are told with the way things look in a design. So we're going to back up to the year 2000 and 2004, just talk about some of the context that we have going into when political campaigns really started to care about graphic design around 2008. So let's look at what the visual landscape was going into 2008. So on the left, we have the Democrats. On the right, we have the Republicans. So what do we notice are the differences between these? So on the left, with the Democrats, we have serif typefaces. On the right, we have bold sans serif typefaces. So you have the Democrats who are gonna do good government and balance the budget and maybe give you health care. On the right, you have the Republicans who are gonna, I don't know, go to war and then 4 years later, hopefully win the war. So this is kind of the visual landscape that we're looking at. So let's jump forward to 2008. You have this young upstart named Barack Obama. He gave this great speech at the 2004 convention. A lot of enthusiasm around him, but not that many people had heard of him. The people who had heard of him, though, were really, really excited about him. He had about 5% name recognition. So when you enter the race without a lot of name recognition, but a lot of excitement behind you, what you really need to do is mobilize that base behind you and get them excited to raise money for you, to call people, to knock on door, to move to Iowa, and knock on doors there. So you kind of see that we're appealing to this democratic vernacular with the typography in the early campaign Obama logo. But it's a different serif typeface, right? So if we go back to the previous slide, you look at these serif typefaces. They're a little clunky, maybe a little dusty, a little old. Whereas this feels kind of like a crisp two-piece suit that like a young handsome upstart would wear, right? Even the logo has this like gradient effect of a web startup circa 2008. So this is really all about building excitement for this upstart candidate. Now let's fast forward to June of 2008. He's in a dead heat with Hillary Clinton. Now he needs to start appealing to a broader base, and so his campaign starts using this typeface called Gotham. Now Gotham is a really uniquely American typeface. It's designed by an American, Tobias Frere-Jones, based on the lettering over the entrance to the Port Authority bus terminal. So not rooted in European written tradition and designed by some French guy named Claude, but rather an American named Tobias, based on these letters that were cut out by steelworkers, as opposed to written by monks in manuscripts 1,000 years ago. So it has this sort of like honest vernacular quality to it, right? It has this unique ability to appeal to both high and low culture. Gotham is used by the Tribeca Film Festival. It's also used by the Maury Povich Show. So there's something when you say change we can believe in, which is a pretty earnest slogan. You can still believe, you can actually believe in it. So let's compare that to what if we set change we can believe in times. This doesn't feel like change, right? This is academic and old and dusty. I don't believe that change is coming. Well, maybe it's the difference between a serif and a sans serif typeface. Sorry, I forget sometimes that this might be a layperson audience. So if I do say something that like a term you're not familiar with, just please drop it in the chat or the Q&A. Serifs are the little feet on letters. So Times, for example, is a serif typeface. Sans serif means without serif. So let's compare Gotham to something like Helvetica, a well-known serif typeface, used ubiquitously, obviously a good typeface. Still doesn't feel like we can believe in this change, right? Because if you compare the way Gotham is set, it's nice and open, it's round, feels inviting. Helvetica is a little more square set. It's got these like squared off terminals. I don't believe in that change either. So clearly, the subtleties in a typeface have an effect on how the words set in that typeface are perceived. Now let's fast forward to August. He's won the nomination. He picks Joe Biden as his running mate. Picks an old white guy to try to convince other old white people that it might be okay to vote for a young black guy and that he's not going to bring socialism, unfortunately. But so anyway, what we need to do is get people to start picturing him as the president. That they can like go into the voting booth and see themselves checking the box next to their name. So they go back to a serif typeface. This word mark that they started using around August is based on the typeface Requiem. It's not Requiem though. Requiem is actually like a really old, it's a Renaissance book face. What they did was they clipped the serifs really short, and then they added a stroke they added some weight to the outside of the letters to make them not so delicate. Kind of feels like this is like already inscribed on the Resolute desk, right? They also got rid of the gradient on the logo. So, feeling a little bit more established, a little bit less like an upstart. All right, now on the other side of the aisle, we had John McCain. And there's a word that people use to describe John McCain more than any other word. It's a word that starts with M. That word's maverick. John McCain was the kind of Republican that was known for reaching across the aisle and working with Democrats. So what's a maverick typeface? Is it a serif? Is it a sans serif? You got, is it a Democratic serif, Republican sans serif? No, it's neither. It's Optima. This typeface, it's a flared sans serif. So it's not really this, monolinear sans. It flares like a serif typeface, but it doesn't have serifs. Now, there's actually that's not really the reason that they use this typeface. The real reason they use this typeface was because there's another thing that people associate with John McCain, and that's that he was a war hero in the Vietnam War. And Optima is the typeface that's used on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So even if you're not familiar with that connection, I think that there's probably some subtle association you have in your head where seeing McCain set in this typeface, especially with a star over it, has some subtle association to military heroism. Okay, now let's fast forward to August for John McCain. He's running about 8 points down in the polls. He needs a game change. He needs to bring the base back in, bring in the Republican base. So he brings in the right-wing governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin. And so what do you do with your type when you're trying to bring the Republican base back in? Well, you use Optima Extra Black. You go super, super bold. Okay, so let's fast forward to 2012. Obama's been president for 4 years, ran on change, brought change. We have change. Change is good. So how do you depict change standing its ground? Well, you put serifs on Gotham. Now, on the other side of the aisle, you had Mitt Romney. And I don't know what you should do if your candidate's biggest liability is that he's seen as an out-of-touch rich guy. But I'm pretty sure what you shouldn't do is use Trajan, the typeface of Roman emperors. This is also something that designers tend to like to do, is they try to make a logo out of the first letter in a word mark. But the problem with that is that separates that letter from the rest of the word. And so it's really easy to do something like this. Now let's fast forward to 2016. So Hillary Clinton is running for president again, and she has the opposite problem that Barack Obama had in 2008. Everyone knows her name. She has something like 95% name recognition, and everyone already has an opinion about her. So it's not so much about like trying to build excitement or trying to like seize on a certain association with that people have with her. The challenge with her identity is that you kind of need it to feel a little bit inevitable, right? And be like this big tent thing that people can rally under, like have her be a unity candidate. So Michael Beirut and his team at Pentagram designed this logo for Hillary Clinton, and it's based on squares and triangles, meant to be really, really simple, because the idea is that we want this symbol that like is really easy to recreate. Like I don't you may remember walking around in 2016 and like I saw I saw kids had drawn the Hillary logo and it was posted in their window. Also a really simple logo. They did the Google Doodle treatment to it, where they would have different treatments depending for different events. Probably should have included that as a slide, but I didn't. But anyway, so this also shows one strategy of picking a typeface, which is kind of like figure out what, if you do the logo first, you find a typeface to complement it. And so they have this typeface Unity Bold, which is actually Sharp Sans, which is a typeface by a Brooklyn-based type designer named Lucas Sharp. What they did was they took the dots and made them round instead of square. So it is a custom typeface, and but you can see how it has kind of this same geometric relationship with the logo. I think also it kind of speaks in a similar voice to Hillary Clinton. Like she's very, very direct, very sharp. So is this typeface. But I think also like this shows the strength of picking a single typeface and just kind of like using it really consistently. So this campaign just applied Unity to everything, like even to the point where on opposition materials that don't have virtually any campaign branding on, you can still recognize it as belonging to the campaign. The pitfall of this approach is that it can kind of feel samey and corporate a little bit. Like because political campaigns are based on enthusiasm and based on grassroots support. And so if you have someone bringing in a homemade sign, it contrasts with everything else. That's I don't know. I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness, but it's a consideration, right? Okay, so other side of the aisle, we have Donald Trump, and I think that like Trump's logo is a pretty solid expression of his ego, right? So it's this bold, wide sans serif, tracked out. He's all based on his campaign is based on this. I guess, I don't know, populist rage, for lack of a better term. And what I really love about this, though, is that like Trump and Pence have the same number of letters in them, and his ego was such that they couldn't make them the same size. Like Pence is just shoved underneath. Gotham's crossed the aisle with the "Make America Great Again," or something Gotham adjacent. But I think that like one lesson that 2016 shows us is that the most powerful piece of political branding in 2016 was the MAGA hat, which was a virtually undesigned piece of campaign ephemera. And so I think that what that shows is the power of narrative over aesthetics. If you are a person who believes that America was once great and is no longer great, and it's the fault of liberals and brown people, then this message resonates. We're going to move on from this. So let's look at some of the also rans from the Democratic side. So we got Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders is a Democratic socialist running for the Democratic ticket. And his challenge is trying to get these socialist policies to appeal to a broad base. So you can't run on the folks who made this logo, which was Wide Eye Co. They said they were explicitly trying to move away from any sort of any imagery that could be interpreted as like vaguely communist. They deliberately made the star not red, but also the type in this. This is a slab serif typeface. That means the serifs are really, really thick. And slab serifs have this sort of like vintage Americana feel to them. You think about like these, westerns or showbill posters, and so you kind of get this appeal to, in a way, this is sort of like also a little bit of a nostalgic appeal, but it's a nostalgic appeal for like New Deal policies or WPA policies. This idea that like America is best when it's a collective effort. Also, one thing that's really striking about this word mark to me is the B is really, really small. We could go on for a really long time about the choice between using your first name and your last name in a political logo. But I think that like Bernie clearly was trying to be approachable here, and making the B smaller makes for a much more approachable logo. Now, when he ran again in 2020, they really, really leaned into this typeface Jubilat, which is what the logo was based on. They used the black version of it though for the design, for the campaign elements. But again, this is an example of how really committing to a single typeface can create a consistent voice throughout the campaign. Okay, so let's look at Liz Warren. So the story Liz Warren is trying to tell is that she's a fighter, right? Oh, hey, Raquel. Raquel's on there. Liz Warren's design director is in the room, which is awesome. That's super cool. Okay, so if we look at Liz Warren, she's trying to she's a fighter, right? You think about her in these taking on Wells Fargo CEOs and what have you, and nevertheless she persisted, right? And so this is a logo with teeth, right? You've got these like really sharp points on the W and the N, but also rounded off edges. And so it's sharp, but it's also soft. I think much like her. In fact, really leaning into this idea of a fighter, the typeface they were using was a typeface called Ringside, which is based on boxing posters. And then later in the campaign, I don't think you can run a campaign for a college professor without using a serif typeface. So they introduced Freight to their palette, because in addition to Ringside, so you have this like fists up fighting position, but also clear-headed policy, right? Okay, let's look at Julian Castro. So Julian Castro was running kind of on Obama's legacy, and he was part of the Obama cabinet, and so this is a typeface called Mallory, which is designed by the same designer as Gotham, Tobias Fairjones. It's a little bit sharper, a little bit less industrial. You can see that in the angle of the J. What I think is most notable about this logo is like he was the only Latino candidate in the Democratic field, and they're emphasizing the accent in his name. Okay, Pete Buttigieg. So Pete Buttigieg is running as an industrial small town mayor, right? He's trying to bring in the heartland, and trying to sell himself as this this candidate who can bring in the states that we lost in 2016. And so his logo, which was designed by the Brooklyn firm Hyperact, is it's specifically based on this bridge in South Bend, Indiana. Feels like steel, feels kind of like Levi's jeans, right? I think also it kind of feels like a team like a team logo, right? Like we're all on Team Pete. And then, oh, you know what? Raquel just noted that Freight also, she wanted to support a personal fave type designer, Joshua Darden, who was the first African-American credited as a typeface designer. Yes. Jubilat also was, I believe, designed by Joshua Darden, which was the typeface that Bernie was using. So always cool to like see representation in type as well. But on the note of team building, they also built these sort of like almost baseball team logos for the different state campaigns. They had a pretty ambitious design system. They built a pretty complex type palette with these typefaces: industry, active, grotesque, and domain text, and like showed how to use it consistently to create this voice of sort of coming out of the industrial heartland. They abandoned it like 2 months later and just started putting everything in Futura. And I don't know if that was motivated by poorly planned licensing or what. Also, I don't know what this is supposed to mean, the shape of our democracy, but I digress. So Kamala Harris, the folks who designed her campaign identity, also Wide Ico, same as Bernie's identity from 2016. They specifically said that they were trying to recall Shirley Chisholm's campaign design. Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman to run for president in 1972. She was a congresswoman from right here in Brooklyn. And I think that like condensed sans serifs really have that sort of that appeal to these mid-century populist movements. Alex Nestor mentioned Trey Seals at Vocal Type Co. You see like some of the typefaces that he's done are these like bold, condensed sans serif, grotesque typefaces. Personally, this logo reminds me of this. I think because the typeface they chose, Bureau Grotesque, has this really idiosyncratic S that curls around, which is the same thing as the J in the Jimmy. I mean, it's the same typeface. I've also heard some people call it the Unbreakable Kamala Harris after Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Later in the campaign, they emphasized the syllables in her name, which is kind of fun. And then we have Joe Biden. Now Biden was running as the unity candidate, right? He's trying to be his appeal is like we've had the country's been torn apart for the last 4 years, and we need to come back together. And so he's really running as like trying to be the Democratic Party standard bearer, and you can see that in his type, where you have if you look at Gotham from Obama and then Unity / Sharp Sans from Hillary, it's got this same sort of geometric construction, like really circles and triangles and squares. I think also some of Biden's earlier stuff shows some of the pitfalls of leaning too hard on a single typeface. This typeface is brother 1816. I could be getting the numbers wrong. But you can see that like when you set it in all caps, it becomes kind of, especially for like long phrases like this, it becomes a little bit overbearing. So when Biden won the primary and became the nominee, his creative team completely redid the type palette, working with Jonathan Heffler of Heffler & Co. and chose the typefaces Mercury and Decimal as their type palette. And so this is what Robin Cantor, the senior creative advisor for Biden's campaign, had to say about the typefaces. Decimal finds its roots in wristwatches. It's true as time. Mercury with its roots in the written word. And I think that's a little bit of bullshit. You hear a lot of bullshit around descriptions of typefaces, and part of that is because typefaces are really hard to describe. We're talking about like purely formal characteristics and how they make us feel. But I think that I don't think this is completely off base. The idea that like this says our typography is bound by the truth, and I think that like there's something to be said for like the straightforwardness of these forms and how they much like Gotham, how many years ago? 12 years ago, has this straightforwardness to it. And of course, when they announced Kamala Harris as Biden's running mate, they redid the logo in Decimal. And one thing I think is really interesting about this is, Biden is the unity candidate, right? He's trying to run a Big Ten campaign. And I think it's really interesting how this logo kind of is not that dissimilar from Trump's. It's also like a bold, extended sans serif. It's not as extended and not as tracked out. But yeah, I think it's interesting that they're kind of like encroaching on his territory a little bit. So that's part one of this presentation. Are there any questions? You can throw them in the Q&A. I'll vamp for a little bit to give y'all some time to throw some stuff in there. No, we can move on to part two. Yeah. Okay, maybe there'll be questions at the end. My favorite part I've given some version of that talk like probably a dozen times as part of the classes that I teach, and every single time I get different questions, and it's really interesting to see what people are curious about. So hopefully y'all have some questions before the end. Dylan Hansen says, "This is so cool." Thanks, Dylan. Okay, so the second part of this presentation. Now, I was the design director for Mel Gagarin's congressional campaign this past year, and I'm going to show you the pitch deck that I presented at my very first meeting with Mel and Alita, his wife and campaign manager. And you know what? Before we do that, Alex has a question, which is, do you see variable typography finding its way into political branding? Yeah, I mean, variable fonts are a tool, right? If y'all aren't familiar with variable fonts, so variable fonts are the latest greatest in type technology, and it's the idea that like within a single font file, you have, rather than having this drop-down menu with a bunch of discrete styles, so you have like light, regular, bold, black. Instead, you have contained within that font file the entire design space, and you have sliders with which you can pick that. You can tune in the exact the exact weight that you want, or the exact slant that you want, the exact amount of condensed that you want, depending on the typeface. Some people have also done like really weird stuff with variable fonts. Like the typeface designer James Edmondson has done some really fun stuff. He has a typeface called Chi, which has a gravity axis. So like the weight, the heaviest part of the typeface moves up and down the letters. I mean, I think that variable fonts, like it's a tool, right? So I think that like, I actually think I was reading Jonathan Heffler's blog post about making the Biden-Harris logo, and I think he said that they used like a variable version of Decimal to really fine tune the letter forms for that word mark. So yeah, I mean, I think variable fonts are really, really cool, and I hope that more people get tuned into them, and that more design software supports them. And if we see that, then I'm sure we'll see more of it in political branding. Okay, and Emma Walls asks, is there a notable difference between color use in the typefaces used by Democratic and Republican parties? Do some rely more on blue or red? I'm not really a color expert. So I don't think I can answer that question. I don't think I can answer that question with confidence. I do think that like this year you saw an unusual proliferation of candidates using colors other than blue and red. And I think part of that is motivated by trying to stake out a territory for themselves, like a specific branding territory. I also wonder if we're in a moment in which like overt patriotism is a little bit frowned upon. I don't know, but Emma, what you should do is look at the Center for American Politics and Design. It's politicsanddesign.com, might be .org. What they have is a database of logos from congressional, gubernatorial, and presidential candidates from the last couple cycles. And they tag them with the typefaces that they use, with the colors that they use. So they have a pretty solid data set. And if you're interested in exploring that topic, like that's a good data set for you to dig into. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next part of the presentation. But if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. You don't have to. If you have questions about the first part, it's okay. We can answer them in the second part. So a couple of years ago, I attended a conference here in New York called First Round. It was put on by the blog Brand New, and it was the best design conference I've ever been to. The presenters there presented their first round pitch decks from identity projects. And it was so enlightening to see what a project is at the very, very beginning versus what it becomes. And so I hope that this is similarly enlightening for you. Like this is a completely unedited pitch deck that I presented to Mel and Alita on July 25th, 2019. So this is a word mark for Mel for Progress. And what I'd like to start with is a statement, as a strategy statement. Just let's talk about what we're talking about, so that we know that whatever identity we're designing is telling the narrative we want to tell. So this is what I wrote. Melquiades Gagarin is a lifelong community advocate who is running for Congress in New York's 6th congressional district to be the bold progressive fighter unbeholden to the political establishment that this moment calls for. And so Gotham, we just talked about how Gotham was used really effectively by Barack Obama's campaign in 2008, to the point where it's really taken hold of the Democratic political imagination, where about a quarter of Democratic candidates are using Gotham. This is from the Center for American Politics and Design. In fact, your opponent is using Gotham. And we could just set your name in Gotham and call it a day. But what we really want to do is figure out what's the story that we're trying to tell, and how can we use type to tell that story. So let's start with seizing on the idea that Mel's a community advocate. And so when I think of community, one thing I think of is these like is grocery stores. These like linchpins of a community, and the hand painted signs that you don't see that often anymore. But definitely, even in a bodega, you see these like kind of less. Maybe not as professionally painted, but still like done with a chisel marker or a broad Sharpie or something along those lines. And so let's see what we do when if we take the sturdiness and the sturdiness and the proportions of Gotham, and then we apply some of this like brushwork to it. So this was direction one. Here it is in a couple different lockups. At this point, we weren't sure whether we were going to use Mel's full name or just Mel. So tried it in a couple different lockups. So that's direction one. Direction two, unbeholden to the political establishment. So you don't see a lot of political campaigns using scripts. So I thought, well, okay, so to convey that Mel's an outsider, what if we use a script? And how do we do a script that like feels like that, doesn't feel frivolous, like still feels like it's grounded? So this is what I came up with. And what I liked about this one was its flexibility. You could you know, you could kind of lock up messaging with it differently. Like if you look at what's on the right, it reads as Mel Gagarin, but it also reads as Mel for Progress, and melforprogress.com was our website, which is pretty. So that was good to, you know, that was good, a positive of this direction. So that's direction 2. Direction 3, bold progressive fighter. So, you know, going back to, if you think about Liz Warren's identity, you have the kind of teeth on the W and the N. And so I kind of seized on that and said, like, I want something that feels really sharp, but also something that feels a little bit like a shield. Like he's here to protect us from the onslaught of corporate interests and whatnot. And so this is what I drew for direction 3. Kind of also based on chisel marker typography. Has that sort of like bold, condensed feel of protest signs and whatnot. Here it is in a couple different lockups. And thank you. So at this point, you know, we started talking through the different directions. Mel really liked direction number 2, but Alita and I kind of pushed him off of it. We both felt that it, like looking at them all together, we felt that it felt a little bit more like a bougie restaurant than anything else. Mel called his daughter Zoe over and said, Zoe, which one do you like? And she says, I like number 3 because it feels like graffiti, but you can still read it. And I thought that was like super astute because like it does have this sort of like the casual feel of graffiti, but is also very legible. And like we talked through these directions and we ended up deciding that number 3 was our direction, which I'm super happy about. I went into this meeting favoring number 1, which you can probably tell by the fidelity of these sketches. Like 1 was definitely the most worked over sketch. 3 definitely got the least amount of love. So God bless Mel and Alita for seeing this sketch and like seeing the potential in it. Because after quite a bit of working and reworking, this is where we landed. And so from this word mark, I wound up building out an entire typeface called we called it Chisholm Bold internally after Shirley. And what's great about having a campaign typeface, like we said before, is that you can throw it on anything and it becomes instantly part of your campaign branding. Now we can't lean on Chisholm entirely because, you know, Chisholm is an idiosyncratic typeface, not great for text, so we need some supporting typefaces. So to pick a supporting typeface, I picked Azo Sans. I wanted something that I went to Adobe fonts because I figured that like if you know down the line I would want people to have access to the fonts as well. And I also came up with a Google font fallback, which was Nuneato Sans, just so that we had options and, you know, depending on who would be designing our campaign literature down the line. And so the reason I picked Azo was because it kind of feels like if you take Chisholm and turn it into a monolinear sans serif, like you can see that in the branching of the N in particular. Like if you look at the N in sans and the H's and M's in Chisholm, like it has that angular branching as opposed to soft branching. Also, if you look at like the way the terminals are cut off on the S, A, and C, it has kind of a little bit of a snap to it, mimicking the brushwork that I was going for in Chisholm. So yeah, so that's why I picked Azo as a supporting typeface. Also, if you look at the G, it has that same construction as the. I don't have a G here, but it has that same sort of construction. So that's why Azo became the supporting typeface. So here it is this was our you know, poster that we put up all around Queens. Here it is on the website talking about policy. What's great is like towards the end when we just needed to churn out graphics for, you know, we had like 3 events a week and we needed to promote these. I could just like throw stuff into Chisholm and like get it out the door like that without really thinking about it, because you don't want to have to think about these graphics too much. You know, Azo, this was when we tried, I tried just abandoning the logo for a little bit and setting Melquiades Gagarin in Chisholm. Maybe it was a misadventure. I don't know. We could get a little cheeky with it. Can also get earnest though. So like this. Getting Mel to record that VO was like pulling teeth. He oh shoot, did y'all not hear? Y'all didn't hear that. Okay. Man, y'all need to tell me that stuff early on, so I'm not just sitting here silently. I don't know if there's anything I can do about that. Oh well. Wait. Oh, share computer sound. Okay. Let's try again. There we go.
This doesn't feel like a democratic country anymore. America was built on constitutional principles that empower the people. The government's role is not just for defense and to give corporations tax cuts so that a select few can make an enormous amount of wealth. It's to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to live a dignified life. Even before COVID struck, we had more people living in poverty than we did in 2008. We need to wake up and actually address income inequality and make sure that everybody has healthcare coverage, that everybody has access to education, that everybody has a roof over their head. I'm running for Congress to fight for the people in Queens who need a voice in the halls of power.
There you go. Yeah, Raquel notes this is the benefit of captioned text, which is good for hearing impaired people, but also for social media where most of the time video is playing without sound by default. Getting Mel to record this VO was like pulling teeth because he does not talk at a reasonable pace easily. And so it took I think maybe a dozen takes to get the right cadence. But actually, our most effective advertising, like the advertising that got the most engagement, was our Oppo ads, and that makes sense because when you're running a primary campaign against an incumbent, you can't really only run on positive messaging. You really need to convince people that it's also worth getting the other person out of office, right? And so what we did was we directly parodied Grace Meng's endorsement ads. So we didn't Photoshop her endorsement ads. We created these from this is her publicly available congressional portrait. And so where she would have ads that say like this union endorses Grace is with Grace Meng. We said developers and landlords are with Grace Meng. They've given her almost $400,000 in campaign contributions. Wall Street is with Grace Meng. They've given her almost $300,000 in campaign contributions. And so that was this by far got the most engagement out of anything we made. So I think this also is a testament to the power of political branding, right? In that it can be weaponized against you. And then so at the end of the campaign, we wanted to fire our parting shot and really tie it all together and say like, okay, so yes, Grace Meng is a Democrat and is nominally opposed to the guy in office and his Republican enablers in Congress. But part of the problem is that we have Democrats who take money from the wrong people, who appeal to the wrong people, who aren't fighting for the interests of working families, but are fighting for the interests of their corporate donors, and who aren't in touch with the issues that people are facing on the ground. So this was the final campaign ad that we posted in the days leading up to the election.
Hello, you have reached the office of Congresswoman Grace Meng. Please listen carefully to the following options. no one available to take your call at the moment. So please leave a message after the tone.
All right. So we, election day came on June 23rd. We didn't get official results until about a month later because there was so much mail-in voting. We didn't win. We wound up, but we did hold the congresswoman to less than 65% of the vote, and we also managed to flip her votes on defense spending, on criminal justice reform, and on impeachment. So I think that even though we didn't get exactly the result that we wanted, we still had a lot to be proud of. In that we showed an incumbent congresswoman who had never faced a primary challenge that she can't get complacent, and needs to really fight for the concerns of her constituents. So the dust settled from Mel's campaign, and about a month later, this happened. Alita, Mel's campaign manager and wife, got called on by her neighbors to run for city council. So this approach with this campaign, I'm now good friends with Mel and Alita. So I did not take as rigorous or as formal an approach to presenting potential identity directions as I did with Mel, just because we had been working together for a year and have an understanding with each other of we clear lines of communication and whatnot. So I presented 3 directions. This direction I'm calling the straightforward direction. So we have this like bold condensed sans serif that well, I guess I should talk about Alita too, because I talked about Mel. So Alita's also running. Alita's running as like the clear progressive in her district. She's running because she believes in a New York that can work for all of us. We've had misplaced priorities the last couple decades, where we've invested in things like the police state over programs that benefit our community, things like education, things like social services, things like after-school programs. And so Alita's gonna dare to envision a New York that is better than it is now. Also, because we have a really unique opportunity to do that. The city is going to have to rebuild in the next year, and we want to build it in a way that it's going to work for us, not for wealthy corporate interests. So this was direction 1, where we have the bold condensed sans serif appealing to populist movements, right? Very, very straightforward, very direct. This was direction 2. I had a typeface I was sitting on. It was so in my day job, I work on novelty gift items based on American history, literature, science, what have you, and we do a lot of Rosie the Riveter products. And I got really sick of like redrawing Futura to look more like the Rosie the Riveter lettering every time we made a Rosie the Riveter thing. So I decided to just like make a typeface based on the Rosie the Riveter poster. And so I'm like, well, let's use this typeface and see what it feels like. And I think that even if you don't get that reference specifically, it has this sort of powerful femininity and also this appeal to the optimism of workers' movements. So that was direction 2. Direction 3, I tried to lean into the caretaker, into that Alita as a caretaker. And so this is a typeface called Compadre by Ono Typeco. And it has these kind of flared ends, like a little bit of a softness to it. I would have dug myself in a hole if we had picked this as our direction, because this typeface doesn't have any lowercase, which we would have crossed that bridge when we came to it. But we were all really into direction number 2. So after a bunch of iteration, this is where we landed. I took the Riveter typeface and I made the proportions a little friendlier, like less dramatic a little bit, so that they can set in a tighter lockup. So this is Riveter bold. Still a work in progress. Excuse me. Here it is on the website. Here it is in endorsement graphics. So for supporting typeface, right now I'm using Century Old Style, which is a, like a sturdy Scotch Roman typeface. Feels very kind of square and a little bit feels kind of the same era as the Riveter type. So trying to like speak in that consistent voice. And then we can also use it to to promote events. So I'm looking forward to really seeing how this campaign identity evolves over the next year. We're only about a month and a half into this campaign now, and election day is not until June. So so looking forward to seeing how this plays out. So that's it for the talk. Remember to vote. We got another week left. If you haven't voted yet, figure out how you're going to vote. Maybe if your state has early voting, try to vote early. If you've gotten an absentee ballot and filled it out but haven't mailed it back, go find a drop off. And thank you. So let's look at some questions now.
And just while we still have everyone, just wanted to say, if you've enjoyed this talk with Eric, we have a lot of great programs for the rest of the week. If you want to check out our website, you can see more of them. But just wanted to get that in before people started dropping out. So we'll go back to you.
Yeah. You assume they're going to drop out for questions?
They have something else to do.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so Alex asks, how much lead time did you give yourself for branding a candidate? And when making the display face, did you have enough time there? Yeah, time is always a factor, right? So in both Mel and Alita's case, I think we had about a 2-week turnaround between the first meeting and the campaign launch. Maybe a little bit longer, that was enough time. It was quick, but it wasn't too fast. Now, in terms of making a typeface, it wouldn't have worked if we had a design, if we had like an actual, like, if it hadn't been a small grassroots DIY campaign where until the very end I was pretty much the only person designing things for the campaign, because a font is a tool, and people expect their tools to work a certain way, and an in-progress font doesn't work the way you expect it to work all the time. And because I designed it, I'm familiar with those idiosyncrasies. I can work around them, and but handing it off to someone else is a different question. So it wouldn't have, like, making a typeface, I would not advise making a custom typeface for a political campaign like from scratch. But I like making typefaces, and I like having excuses to make typefaces, and this was a really good excuse to make them. Raquel asks, curious to hear more about the slant. I've been seeing it proliferate since AOC's debut, a nod to progressive left branding. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been using like upward slanting logos, especially since AOC, AOC's campaign in 2008. She's not the first person to have an upward slanting logo. In politics, I hadn't seen them much before, but like upward slants are like a pretty solid way to convey optimism. And so I think that was really more what was more the motivation. I think also just like this typeface that I had sketched, like it had a slant to it, and it's kind of fun to take italics and rotate them up, right? So I mean, I think it's motivated by conveying optimism, but now I do think it sort of is a way of conveying that you're a progressive left candidate, or trying to seize on that. I mean, actually, like with Alita's campaign, the purple that we're using in Alita's campaign it's Alita's favorite color, but it's also kind of meant as an expression of solidarity with other progressive candidates in Queens, particularly progressive women candidates, because a lot, AOC used purple, not this purple, but purple, and she used a purple in her campaign, and then Tiffany Caban's campaign for DA also used purple, and we looked at purple for Mel's campaign. It didn't feel right. I don't know if it's because Mel's a man, or I don't know what was. I don't know, but we had always kept it as a secondary color and never really ended up using it. We wound up going with this sky blue because the way we thought about it was like, if navy blue is the Democratic establishment blue, what's bluer than that? Sky blue. So that was our thinking. Hopefully that answers your question. David asks, do the candidates you work with have much to say or anything to say about the typography? I think that my goal, as I try to get people on the same page as me as much as possible. Like people, I don't like the phrase educating your clients. Like that's a phrase that people like to use, because I think that implies a certain imposition of an opinion. But I do like educating my clients. Like with Mel's campaign, I actually, before presenting that pitch deck that I showed you, I presented the first half of this presentation. I showed them took them through the presidential campaigns, showing how they use typography, just so we had this common understanding that the way type is used can affect the way your message is perceived. So, I think that there's, in general, Mel and Alita have both trusted me with the direction of the direction of their campaign, but, they have opinions, and I like hearing their opinions. I think that some designers get really, really precious about their opinions about things. It's like, I know better than other people, but I don't know, if type reminds you of something, it doesn't matter if you're trained in typography or trained in design. It reminds you of that thing. That's a valid opinion to have, and it's valuable and relevant to this campaign. So they do have things to say about it. A lot more. It's just does this work for what we're trying to do? Stefan asks, do you know about any psychological focus group studies of the subjective interpretation of typography? I'm wondering how much uniformity in perception there is out there. Yeah, there are studies. I can't name any specific ones, but they pop up in the discourse every now and then. Some of them have I think that some actually you'll like this one, Stefan. A couple of years ago, Errol Morris did in partnership with the New York Times, did a study to figure out what's the most trustworthy typeface, and they wound up landing on Baskerville as the most trustworthy typeface, and published this. Basically, it's a little bit of bullshit, but also a little bit rooted in truth. It's hard to develop consistent methodology for figuring out the psychological implications of type, because so much of it is based on subtleties. So a study I would love to see, if I were designing a study about the interpretation of type, I would love to see just set a paragraph in a representative typeface from different styles. So you have a grotesque, you have a Scotch Roman, you have a Didone, you have a Venetian, you have a Clarendon, and just ask people to name words that they think of as they read this paragraph set in this typeface. I would just like to see what the responses to that are. But even then, something as simple as if one Scotch Roman typeface that has gentler brackets versus another Scotch Roman typeface that has more circular brackets, that can kind of completely change the perception of that typeface. So it gets really slippery really quick. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but Parker asks, what's your process as you begin designing? Are you typically starting by hand, testing out chisel marker strokes before going digital? So I actually happen to have a sketch pad that Well, so I got I heard from Mel. I got the email from Mel when I was on a plane to Denver to go to my friend's wedding, and I hadn't brought literally any. I hadn't brought my laptop. I hadn't brought anything with me because I wasn't intending to work that weekend. And so I got off the phone with them in my hotel room, and I ran across the street to Target and I bought a sketch pad and some Sharpies and some whiteout because I'm I really want to just get started on this immediately. So this is the sketch pad of just I'm presenting. You can even see pretty early on, kind of had a rough version of the direction we landed on. So I'm presenting this pretty clear headed. Should I get out? Should I get out of screen share? Let's get out of screen share. Let me go back to Zoom. Yeah. So I mean, I present this pretty clear, clear-cut strategic narrative in the pitch, but that's not. A lot of that is retrospective, right? You're just kind of drawing stuff and seeing what bubbles to the surface, and then once you kind of settle on three directions, figure out, okay, why are these the things that are bubbling to the surface? Is there a strategic justification for this? Yeah. So yeah, there's the script version. There's the script one. Kind of see the start of the grocery store sign one. There's the actual tight sketch. Here's a pencil sketch of the the chisel version. I don't know what was happening here. Anyway, so yeah, lots and lots of drawing. Yvette asks, as far as your progress goes, how much time do you spend on researching or ideating before moving forward with direction, or does this depend on the identity of the candidate to figure it out? Yeah, I mean, I think that I said, different designers do this different ways, but I set it up. I think some people want to go into the first meeting with a really clear, I figured this direction out. Here is what I present to you, and take it or leave it. And that's not what I'm interested in. I'm more let's figure out three things that I think are heading in the right direction, more or less, and then let's talk about them. And because I don't feel confident enough in that after one discussion we've adequately defined the problem. It can be as in-depth of a discussion as it can be a super in-depth discussion, but even then, I won't claim to have a complete grasp of the problem until, a complete grasp of the problem after that conversation. And I'm not really one to just put my head down and research and figure something out on my own. I'd really like to just let's make something and have something to look at and then push off against that. Because I think that having something concrete to push off against can really help define the problem. Does that answer your question? See, it's weird. I can't see you. I can't hear you. I assume y'all are there. So that's all the questions. Thank y'all so much for joining. This was a real pleasure. I really appreciate y'all coming here and just letting me geek out on you for the past hour. If you want to keep in touch, my email is ericbdoctor@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out. Enjoy the rest of your day. Josh, are you still here?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to send this out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, thanks to everyone for coming. Really appreciate it, and thank you, Eric. When we started putting this together, you were easily one of the first people. I was like, oh, we need to give Eric a spot because I'd seen this talk earlier in the year and just knew how great it was. So really appreciate you taking the time to do this for us. As I mentioned earlier, we do have another 3.5 days of programs, that we're doing for Creativity Week. So please go to our website, look at the Creative Week tab, and sign up for anything you think's interesting. We really looked for people that we thought would provide the most interesting content for you all to watch and be inspired by. So, if you like this program, I'm sure you're going to find something else that you like in there as well. As with this one, minimum donation of $1, but it's really all that money is going back towards the prizes for the show itself. We're not pocketing any of that money. So it's all for a good cause and to help creatives in their projects. So thank you again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.